morning.
We're here to talk about World. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, it certainly won't be the last. Some quick stats before we get into things. The project only officially launched less than 2 years ago, but there's been more than 25 million users have downloaded the app. They've used it to complete more than 340 million transactions. And over 12.5 million users have visited an orb. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Before we get into Adrian's background, Adrian, can you talk a little bit about the problem that the World project is solving?
Yeah, I think all of us know what the problem is. We just don't necessarily think about it as a problem. We tend to think about it as an annoyance. You're online, you're interacting with something, could be in a game, could be in a social network, could be reading a comment that is on a media site, and you're just not sure whether it's a person that made that comment or that you're playing against a game. And the question is, how can you gain that confidence? How can you become really comfortable that your interactions are with people and not with bots? And it turns out that's a really hard problem, right? And so that's what we've been working on.
Give me a sense of kind of the scale and different types of applications where this problem emerges. Is it like financial or is it social?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. And the longer we look into it, the more we find really curious situations. So there was an example just a couple of days ago that I read about in the news where there's a class action lawsuit, settlements taking place in California. They had 100,000 humans apply and 21 million bots apply to receive the benefit from that. State of California community colleges just last week were talking about the fact that about 50% of the students that are enrolling for online courses turn out not to be real people, they're bots. Then of course you have online games where you have the vast majority of participants are bots. And then it goes on and on and on. And so the more we think about it and the more we look into it, the more we realize that it's a problem that's just everywhere.
And Adrian, going a little bit into your background,
Sure.
You're the chief architect at Tools for Humanity, core contributor to World. What were you doing before?
So I spent the early part of my career trying to figure out security. I worked on building the security model for Android operating system. Before that, working on the web at Macromedia and Adobe. Spent a bunch of time at the National Security Agency on some of the very early understanding what exploitation would look like for global scale networks. And so this is part and parcel with how do we build a more robust security environment and private environment for people who want to work on the web.
And World is called the Real Human Network. What does that mean, and how do we accomplish it?
Yeah, so early on, you had Turing. And Turing said, eventually, maybe we'll call a machine intelligent if you can't tell the difference between a person and that computer, right? And we've built all kinds of technology which was intending to do that. We've built CAPTCHAs, we answer Q&A. But as Sam Altman and Alex Blania, the founders of our company, were sitting together thinking about the direction that AI was going in, they began to realize that eventually all of the tests that we had built were going to break. And 6 or 7 years ago, if I were to say that, you'd be like, when is that going to happen? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now? Well, at this point, we've passed that, right? At this point, you and I interacting online, we can't really tell. Like, we have a general sense of unease that most of the things that we're interacting with probably aren't real people, but we don't know for sure. And that's because the Turing test is long since passed. And so as they were exploring that idea, they started thinking about, like, what do I know is real? And it turns out what you know is real is the things in the physical world. And so a lot of the work that we've done is try to figure out how do you take a physical world identity and apply that to an online world. And most of the challenges are security challenges and privacy challenges. And so that's what we've had to do, is build a bunch of foundational security and privacy technology to make it possible. We started with the realization that the key primitives you need is, are you a human? And then the second is, because humans are going to delegate some of their identity to things like agents, are you a specific human? And so uniqueness was the second attribute that was really, really important. And so that's what we call proof of humanity. It's the proof that you are a human and you are the same human on an ongoing basis in a set of interactions that you're having with a particular service. The core technology to determine that, it's just a fancy camera. You may have seen it. They're becoming more and more popular. There are about 1,500 of them around the world right now, and we're expecting that number to expand dramatically over the next year. It looks like a bowling ball. size, and it is a camera that takes pictures in infrared, it takes it in visible light, analyzes all those to determine that you're human, gives that to the person who has requested their proof of human, and then does some uniqueness check based on iris code, which is part of your eye. And so that's the way that we know that someone is human, and then it's combined with blockchain to keep track of uniqueness, and it's combined with zero-knowledge proofs to make sure that when you use that proof of human for any given site, there's no bleeding of information from one site to another. So your interaction with your game is separate from your interaction with your bank, is separate from your interaction with your student loan processing, if you're going to use it to apply for a student loan associated with your online courses. So each of those is a separate interaction that you have control over. And so that's the core sort of capability, is a fancy camera tied to a whole bunch of fancy math to make sure that you're able to have those private interactions. But then you can imagine that any one of those services can start thinking about how they can enhance the experience. You can know that everybody in a particular game is a real body, is a real person. You can know that the person that you're interacting with in your online class is a real person. And you begin to have these types of sort of real world experiences that are online, but are more like the types of experiences that you'd have in the real world.
Can we extend that thought, right, to help
Sure.
make it even more real for the audience of, we talked about gaming, we've talked about, kind of social communities of understanding if you're interacting with a real human versus an automated system. What other kinds of applications could use proof of humanity?
One of my favorite ones dates me a little bit. So for those of you who don't know who Green Day is, they're a band. They play music. They're from the Bay Area, and I was really excited. Not too long after I started at Tools for Humanity, actually. They announced that they were going to play a gig at the Fillmore, which is not far from my house up in San Francisco. It's it's roughly the same size as this venue, right? But they sell out arenas, but they wanted to have a local hometown show. And so they announced the show is going to be happening on Thursday. Today's Monday. In order to go to the show, you have to buy 2 tickets, no more. You have to present photo ID at the time you buy it at the box office. You have to present a driver's license and a credit card. You have to show up with those 2 pieces of identity to be able to go into this concert so that we know that there's no scalpers that are involved. And it has to be the same person that bought it, right? So there's all of these layers of physical protection where I have to reveal a whole bunch of information about myself to go to a punk show, right? Like, it's the exact opposite of the punk ethos, but that's what you have to do in order to have protection around scalping of tickets. That's why, at this point, it's basically impossible to buy an affordable concert ticket, is because there's a whole ecosystem of fraud and automation and reselling of these things that's made it impossible for a normal consumer to participate in that. And the solution, as it's sort of represented right now, is to give up a bunch of information about yourself in order to participate in each one of these things. So you're just scattering, identifying information about your preferences to support an ads-based ecosystem across all of these services. And so that was another example that I ran into in the real world, where it would have been really simple to just say, use my World ID, purchase the ticket, and then verify that I'm the same person that bought that ticket when I walk in the door, and not have to give away who I am or how I bought it. And so that's an example that I've run into in the real world. Gaming is one that we hear lots and lots of people. One that I haven't run into in the real world, but I hear other people do, online dating. I've been married for 25 years next month, and so, yeah, congratulations. But it means I haven't done a lot of online dating, because there was no online dating when I got married, or there wasn't very good online dating at that point. And that's an area where the amount of fraud related to creation of fake accounts is just ubiquitous, and they get into abusive situations, they get into exploitive situations. It's used to commit fraud. And creation of the technology to detect that kind of abuse is expensive, and it's not as effective as it could be. And so that's another area where we found that there's a lot of interest in how World ID can help protect those kinds of services.
That's been one of the shocking things to me, is realizing how pervasive this problem is and how long-standing it's been. Right? Yeah. This isn't a new problem. People tend to think about it as the acceleration of AI is really creating this problem, but it's actually been there for the past 20 years. It's just now being exacerbated by AI.
It cracks me up because Alex and Sam, they're very, very smart, but they were looking to the future, and so they're constantly fixated on, it's gonna get bad. And I'm like, where have you been? Like, I've been in security for 30 years, and I've been fighting bots and automation for 25 of those years, because the first few years nobody would let me know about it. And yeah, it's definitely not a new thing.
It really took a couple engineers on my team to really highlight this. They had worked at AWS and other places. And
Yep.
like, you don't realize how pervasive this problem is, that we can't identify and differentiate between automated traffic and real humans.
And even once you know that it's a real human, trying to figure out what are they all doing, how many of them are there, where are they coming from, it's just a mess.
Right. Okay, so we can enable new types of experiences. We can create better experiences. If somebody wants to onboard and join the real human network, how do they go about it?
So it's pretty simple. At this point, there's a single application that's the primary mechanism that people use to join the network. Our goal is to have this be a protocol. The way I think about it, there was a team in Bell Labs and a few other places that were working on defining the internet protocol, and there was an initial application for how they built the internet. But at this point, nobody would build an application that doesn't use the internet. My belief is that one of the sort of original sins of creating the internet was we didn't think about commerce, and so it's really, really terrible. And we didn't think about people, which is ironic because we describe it as a way to connect people, but really it's just a way to connect applications, and it's a way to connect software, and it's a way to connect physical hardware. Like, people are an afterthought in the internet, right? Every single company creates their own identity stack. Every single company creates their own username and password and all of the infrastructure around that. And so what we're trying to describe is a protocol for what it is to be human, that is private, and then can be extended into all of the types of human interactions that we have. So right now, you install the World app, you can begin interacting with it. Over the next several months, we're in the process of rolling out updates to the protocol that'll make it very easy for any application to directly integrate the protocol itself. And so then it's use whatever that app is. You're in a dating app, and it says, we want to take advantage of the protocol and use it to make our users safer and make it easier for us to detect bad events that are taking place. I can go ahead and I can connect that application directly into the protocol, no need to install the World app or anything along those lines. And so we're expecting over the next year, it's going to be pretty much ubiquitous in terms of its ability to be integrated directly into into any application that wants to use it. And then it'll just be running behind the scenes, providing the infrastructure for humans to be interacting in those applications.
Incredible. And this is such a Sam Altman company in the sense of the scale and boldness of the objectives.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about some of the challenges in trying to solve this problem on a global basis in a privacy-preserving manner?
What isn't challenging?
So you really wanted to create custom hardware, didn't you?
I wanted to create custom hardware. I wanted to make sure that we had to solve some math problems that nobody had ever solved before. I wanted to figure out what a business model is that's not exploitive to those users. I wanted to, I think it's pile upon pile of complexity. When I first started talking to the company, my wife, who's also in tech, it was like, really? You're going to sort of get involved in all of these things at the same time and try to help navigate that? It's like, yeah, because it turns out the reason that we have the challenges is it's hard. And so, yes, start with, we got to build custom hardware, right? Nobody had built a camera that was fast enough and capable of taking a picture of the face and eyes and being able to do that analysis. And so it's custom hardware to be able to do that. Nobody had thought through the privacy implications of building that custom hardware. And so we have actually a lot of the technology that I worked on at Android, using verified boot, and then making sure that the images that are captured are encrypted, making sure that they are never retained on the device, that they're deleted as quickly as possible, so they're never there longer than it takes to send them to the user so they can hold on to them. Now you've got custom hardware. Anybody built hardware? Anybody tried to deliver hardware around the world and deal with all the regulatory agencies just to move hardware from one country to another? I hear there's this thing called tariffs. They've become a popular topic. Independent of tariffs, just the regulatory issues related with like moving hardware from one place to another adds complexity. Every single country, more or less, has a different privacy regime. And so you have to think about how do you satisfy that. Even something as old as, or even something as simple as how old do you have to be to participate is different from country to country, right? The age of consent in some places is 13 for some things, it's 15 for others, it's 18 in others. Some places, it's there's none at all. And so navigating something and trying to figure out how do I build a service for all of humanity, it's trivial. Like it's clear why people have been doing it for years.
And then do it in a privacy-preserving manner using cutting-edge cryptography that's never been developed before.
Well, and then encountering things like, we use the word anonymous in a lot of privacy regulation, but it doesn't have a definition. And so navigating how that term is defined and what it actually means and whether the technology that is being built today satisfies the expected definition of that is something that we've had to have discussions about as well. And then there's baggage around, hey, there's like a token involved. And crypto went from being very exciting to being something that people were very nervous about. And what is the role that that's going to play? How is that going to work? And there's changing regulation related to that. So yeah, it's definitely been an adventure.
In your mindset, Adrian, do you think the greater opportunity is in improving services and applications that already exist today, or is it in creating net new products, services, applications that could not have existed before we have this fundamental primitive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's really easy to see the existing services, and it's easy to see, I'm going to say, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of opportunity in improving those existing services. When I worked on Android, I thought a lot about, how am I going to protect the browser? How am I going to protect those types of things? And the security model to enable that, how I'm going to protect those applications. It was only a few years into Android that I realized the big opportunities were things like Uber. Like, hang on, what? When I was a kid, you were told don't ever get into a car with a stranger. That was like the security model when I was a child, right? But then I became an adult and I worked on a security model that made it possible to have confidence that the person whose car you were getting into was operating in a network, and that network had performed some kind of analysis of that person, including determining that they were a good driver for some definition, no matter what country you were in the world. And so 20 years later, because of technology that I'd worked on the web, and then technology that I'd worked on in mobile, the security model was step off of an airplane in a country that you've never been in before. I was in Indonesia for the first time a couple weeks ago because we were launching World there. Take out your phone and say, who's the nearest stranger that's willing to drive me? And they'll take you where you want to go because security? And so I think we don't know what those opportunities look like. I certainly didn't know what they looked like on Android. But undoubtedly, the opportunities that will be created out of human-only experiences, or whatever that means, are going to be pretty exciting.
That's what I think too. I think it's that net new opportunity that's always so hard to imagine. We're constrained by the things that we already know and have. It's easy to imagine making those better. It's hard to imagine the things that would have already been created or will be created in the future as a result of this.
Yeah, I'm not a very creative person. I'm not. And I know that about myself, so that's probably healthy. But what I really like doing is building tools that work and then giving those to people who are creative, because those are the people that will come up with those experiences. And so for me, it's just like, how do I make the thing that we've promised do exactly what we promised? And that is a pretty satisfying life.
And in terms of some of those net new opportunities, like when we think about it, some people are already building some of those today. Yeah. They're building them inside of World App.
Yep.
Right? So World App is something anybody can download. And then if you want to, you can go and visit an orb, be verified as a real unique human. And that might open up additional experiences within the application. But people are already building these mini apps inside of World App today.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit of how somebody might go about that, or how someone should think about whether they should build a mini app inside of World App?
Yeah, it's actually... I love comparing sort of psychology and sociology of people. For me, mini apps are like a weird thing. I think of applications, I think of services, and I think of them connecting at that level. For people who grew up in a WeChat world or who grew up with super apps, mini apps are like an obvious thing, and that's the locus of so much innovation. So we support both. World App has a developer API for apps that are outside of World App interacting with your proof of humanness. It also exposes APIs for developers that want to build something lightweight. It reminds me in many ways of like the early days of the iPhone or the early days of Android, where you have developers that are building a really simple 1 or 2 function type of application. And what they need is a vehicle for getting out to an audience, right? With 26 million users on World App at this point, 12.5 million of them that have been verified have gone to an orb, and we know that they're real humans. All of them having access to crypto rails, and all of them receiving airdrops and giving them some financial value. It's a pretty exciting opportunity for small developers to begin to build experiences. And so we're seeing everything from credit applications that know that you're a real human and are extending micro lending to those users. We're seeing new experiences around collaborative music sharing, where you know that you're interacting with real humans, and it's a pretty exciting opportunity. But it's a really lightweight way for someone to begin building the types of experiences that 10, 15 years ago were new on mobile, and then some of them turned like, who expected Angry Birds was going to be, like a massive business that's now shooting movies and like making theme parks, and it's just crazy. So I think maybe one of the mini apps that's right now is going to be the next Rovio. I don't know.
100%. And I should have said this at the outset. I'm an investor, venture, and one of the things that we track on a regular basis is the flow of human capital and where it's headed to.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you the number of times that we're sitting around our research table and someone on our investment team points out, the smartest person I know just went to go join Tools for Humanity. What is it that that's created this massive magnet for human capital at Tools?
I think part of it is that it's all so hard. At least for me and for the people that I interact with in the privacy, security, regulatory space, it's like, really? And you tell one of your colleagues that you're looking for something challenging, and they're like, oh, do I have a thing for you? And I think that was the initial impetus for a lot of us in that space. And you're surrounded by people who really, really care. The other thing is not just that it's hard, but there's like a beautiful earnestness to it, where why can't you just do this? Like, why is it that everything has to be like wrapped in advertising? Why is it that you have to disclose this information about you? Why is it that the promise of Web3 is flailing in many ways? And so a real use case, it solves a real problem that's really hard, and that will take a lot of energy, I think attracts talent. And so
people like to work on hard problems. They like hard problems that you can actually solve that will make a positive impact.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so 25 million app downloads today.
Yep.
What does the next 12 months look like? Is there kind of a critical threshold that you want to cross from a user base? How do we think about kind of escape velocity here?
So we have a highfalutin brand, Tools for Humanity. And all of our positioning has constantly been this thing, this network, becomes most valuable when it's at maximal scale. People constantly ask us, why don't you do face analysis? Why don't you do fingerprint analysis? And the answer is, when we did the math, we realized that those technologies that are used to do uniqueness checks right now don't scale beyond 10, 15, 20 million. Fortunately, at this point, we're already there, so we would already be breaking it, and so it doesn't seem silly anymore. A year ago or 2 years ago, it seemed silly to worry about how is your technology going to work at 1 billion. And that's always been, with Sam and Alex, when they talk about, that's where we're going to begin to see real impact. That's where it really makes a difference. So we have some parts of the world right now, Buenos Aires in Argentina, Lisbon in Portugal, where we're beginning to see 10, 20, 30% of the population have a world ID, and we're beginning to see some of the network effects really play out. But we think at a global scale, maybe 150 to 200 million is where you begin to see those effects, and 1 billion is where you know that you have something that really, really matters and can begin to affect the type of change that we think is necessary across the entire internet. So that's the number that we're constantly looking at. When do we get to 1 billion? Year, 2 years, doesn't seem out of the question at this point, given the growth that we've seen.
Classic Sam Altman, scale, scale, scale,
Yep.
Everything else comes after. Adrian, as we're wrapping up here, one last question. What are you most excited about over the next 12 months?
I just want to make things that satisfy the promise. And I think, we're beginning to see large companies realize that not only do they have a problem, they've known that all along, but that the tools that we've built can be a solution to their problem, that can improve the privacy of their users, that can improve the user experience that they have. And some of them are big, right? Some of them are hundreds of millions of users. And so the ability to begin to affect that kind of change, I think, is just incredible, and I'm really excited about it.
I'm at least as excited as you are. I'm fired up. I think we're out of time. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us and doing this, and thank you all for listening to us.